With the loss of air defense and radar, the occupiers have been left blind in the Donetsk region by the Ukrainian armed forces. Urgent. Lukashenko has announced mobilization, Belarus is entering the war, the Kremlin is in flames, and there is a massive fire at an entertainment complex in Moscow. Nuclear bluff instead of tanks. Putin boasts about missiles after the disgraceful parade on Red Square. In
Russia, work has begun on the development of advanced systems with no global equivalents.
The end is already near. Trump has once again announced that the end of the war is coming soon.
Yes, I think the end of the war in Ukraine is already very close.
A fiery morning in Russia. Drones put on an unscheduled show in Krasnodar Krai and Yaroslavl. Western countries sank a Russian ship off the coast of Spain.
Off the coast of Spain, NATO's submarine fleet attacked a Russian ship with torpedoes as it was delivering nuclear reactors to North Korea.
Another slap in the face for Putin. Pashinyan refused to attend the Eurasian Economic Union summit.
The decision looks like a démarche, but the Armenian Prime Minister claims it was made a long time ago.
Hello, I was Adam Rapchu, and this is Ukraine Today. Please subscribe, leave a like, and let's move on to the news. Explosions in Bashkortostan. Local public pages are reporting a fire. Effective strikes by Ukrainian drones not only reduce oil revenues to the Russian budget, but also force the occupiers to move ammunition and drone depots further from the front line. Next, more details about the drone war.
This is a strike on the Russian Army's unmanned systems command post in the occupied part of Kherson region. In the past month, such strikes have been happening more and more frequently. With airdropped bombs, the Ukrainian armed forces are systematically carrying out deep strikes on Russian UAV and ammunition storage depots as deep as 200 kilometers, both on Russian territory and on temporarily occupied Ukrainian territory. Due to the effective strikes by Ukrainian drones, the Russian army is being forced to move ammunition and FPV drone depots deep into the rear, which complicates their logistics.
Agents of Atesh from among the servicemen of the armed forces of the Russian Federation report a radical change in the enemy's logistics. Depots with FPV drones and ammunition are rapidly being moved deeper away from the line of contact. Losses of warehouse facilities have forced the command to make the decision to organize depots deep in the rear. Half a year ago, ammunition and UAVs were kept as close to the front as possible to reduce delivery time. Now trucks unload cargo much farther from the front line. Because of this, the assembly chain before a strike becomes longer, and the routes are extended and more vulnerable.
The number of Ukrainian drones at the front has changed. Their effectiveness and operational depth have also increased, allowing them to strike targets that were previously out of reach. Currently, active strikes are being carried out on the highways connecting Berdyansk and Mariupol. Ukrainian drones are operating as part of an air interdiction operation. This operation is aimed against Russian ground lines of communication.
Russian military bloggers expressed concern on May 10th in response to recent Ukrainian footage showing Ukrainian hardnet drones freely flying over the highway. T0509 Mariupol-Donetsk, also known as the H10 highway, near occupied Mariupol, targeting Russian fuel tankers and other military vehicles.
The strikes are mainly carried out by Hornet drones. Ukrainian fighters may be able to fully automate the Hornet drones within the next 6 to 12 months.
The undeniable reality that the armed forces of Ukraine, and above all their specialized unmanned aerial vehicle units, are able to successfully target and strike this critical highway, essentially serves to definitively confirm the emergence and full implementation of these tactics, of the increasingly widespread and frequent utilization of drones, of this specific quality, which essentially signifies that they are capable of effectively targeting and striking the operational rear of Russian forces.
Russian electronic warfare can jam Ukrainian Hornet drones only if they are not using Starlink or do not have time to automatically lock onto the target. Ukrainian pilots patrol the roads up to 160 kilometers deep from the line of combat engagement. And now, military supply routes to Mariupol and other frontline cities are under the full control of the Ukrainian armed forces, which creates a huge problem for the occupying troops.
A military blogger expressed concern that Ukrainian drones, supported by Starlink and with a flight range of up to 200 kilometers, are reaching the highways. The M14 Mariupol-Berdyansk-Melitopol-Genitchesk highway is a key Russian supply line along the coast of the Sea of Azov, leading to the newly occupied Crimea.
Well, this in general significantly changes the nature of the hostilities because, at the very least, in the very near future, we can expect that supplying Russian troops on the front lines, on the line of combat, will become seriously complicated.
Recently, both Russia and Ukraine have focused on striking and destroying UAV production facilities. The goal is to destroy the drones before they are even built. And in this regard, Ukraine seems to be having more success.
Over the past month, Ukraine has also intensified its campaign of long-range strikes against Russian drone production infrastructure. One of the largest attacks took place on April 19, 2026, when Ukrainian forces struck the Atlant Aero plant in Taganrog, Rostov region. The strikes on the Atlant Aero plant were part of a broader campaign against Russia's drone production network. Later in April, Ukrainian forces struck the Barsamat Special Purpose Center in the occupied Zaporizhzhia region. This facility is engaged in the development of drones, robotic systems, and electronic warfare technologies. There have also been repeated strikes on the Progress plant located in the Tambov region. This facility manufactures sensors and electronics used in modern Russian drones.
Strikes on supply depots are seriously undermining the Russian army's ability to fight effectively. And strikes deep into the occupied territories and the destruction of depots are creating favorable conditions for the deoccupation of Ukrainian territory.
At the same time, Ukrainian Flamingo missiles have so shocked the Kremlin that propagandists on a federal channel are discussing the assassination of Denis Stilleman, the chief designer and co-owner of the company Firepoint. Well, an attempt on his life. Here are the details.
A missile breakthrough. Ukraine is scaling up its own production of long-range weaponry in close cooperation with international companies. In 4 years, Kyiv has increased weapons production by 35 times, switching to high-tech models. Some of the key developments include cruise missiles, Flamingo, the Grom-2 system, the anti-ship Neptune missiles, and drones. This makes it possible to effectively strike oil refineries, logistics, and the occupiers' headquarters. Ukrainian missiles have long been terrorizing the Russians as they reach deep into Putin's country. This is a strike on Cheboksary. The FP-5 Flamingo cruise missile covered a distance of more than 1,500 kilometers.
Technical specifications, target engagement range of over 3,000 kilometers, warhead effectiveness up to 100 kilometers. It should be noted that in terms of technical specifications, the Flamingo surpasses its American counterpart. These are Tomahawk cruise missiles. Based on the extensive testing and evaluation we have conducted, it has become clear that the results demonstrate significant performance improvements across all of the key metrics we observed during the trial phase.
To mass production. The FP-7 ballistic missile, which demonstrated its effectiveness in February 2026, will enter mass production starting in May. The production plan is for hundreds of units per month, given normal funding levels. The FP-7 is the equivalent of the American Ataki MS.
This makes it possible to keep the operational rear of the Russian occupation forces under fire control. I would note that even after the delivery of HIMARS from the United States, with a target engagement range of about 70 kilometers, this has seriously complicated the logistics capabilities of the occupying army. They were forced to move their field ammunition depots and field fuel and lubricant depots to a distance of more than 100 kilometers.
A more powerful version, the FP-9, is intended for strikes deep in the enemy's rear, including Moscow and St. Petersburg. Its codification and serial production are expected in the summer of 2026.
It is no coincidence, given the increased threats to Ukraine's defense at the moment of cruise and ballistic missile use, including strikes on the territory of Moscow and the Moscow region. At present, the occupiers are constructing a fourth line of air defense and anti-aircraft defense systems. We are talking about more than 100 surface-to-air missile systems, the Pantsir S-1 systems, which, according to the Russians, are supposed to protect the skies over Moscow and the Moscow region.
Moreover, Ukraine has officially announced that it has achieved parity with German technologies. According to the head of the Ministry of Defense, Mikhailo Fedorov, the armed forces of Ukraine already have missiles in service that are not inferior to the Taurus in range and effectiveness.
The tactical and technical specifications of the FP5 are about 3,000 kilometers. The FP9 is 850 kilometers. In other words, the Ukrainian side already has its own strike capabilities that significantly exceed the technical characteristics of their German counterparts. But most importantly, we are no longer dependent now on the political will of the German leadership at the moment of making decisions regarding strikes on the territory of the occupying country.
Kyiv is also actively using domestically produced Sapsan and Neptune missiles to strike targets in Russia, demonstrating their effectiveness.
The tactical and technical characteristics of the Sapsan surpass their Russian counterparts. And this makes it possible to create the so-called principle of the missile spear, meaning the inevitability of strikes on the territory of the occupying country at any given moment. Mirror responses to terrorist attacks from the Russian Federation.
Over the past 4 years, the Ukrainian defense industrial complex has made a real technological leap, transforming itself from an outdated Soviet base into one of the most innovative defense industries in the world. While the Kremlin is forced to beg for shells from North Korea and drones from Iran, Ukraine is scaling up its missile retaliation program.
The Ukrainian side has already surpassed the capabilities of the Russian Federation when it comes to striking enemy territory using fixed-wing drones. Even the occupiers themselves admit this. In addition, the development of cruise and ballistic missiles allows the Ukrainian side to seriously impact the economic potential of the occupying country as further events unfold. Funding for the active phase of combat operations in Ukraine.
Additionally, more than 500 domestic companies are working every day on the creation of the latest UAVs. Today, the capabilities of the Ukrainian defense industry allow for the production of more than 2 million drones per year.
In the past 24 hours, Russia has lost at least 1,130 invaders, killed and wounded. Thus, since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, this amounts to 1,344,180 occupiers. In addition, over the past 24 hours, Ukraine's defense forces have destroyed 2 Russian tanks, 1 armored combat vehicle, 50 artillery systems, and dozens of other pieces of Russian military equipment. Now is the perfect time to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it. Please do it right now. Thank you and glory. Putin is striving for control over Kyiv and Odessa in Ukraine. He plans to expand territorial demands in the event of a complete capture of Donbass. This is reported by the Financial Times. According to the publication, the Russian military command has once again convinced the bunker dweller that his army is capable of taking the Donetsk and Luhansk regions under control by autumn. That is, if he lives that long. I agree, it sounds like wishful thinking, but it's not without basis. Because such thoughts arise amid a new wave of rumors about the dictator's poor health and a possible assassination attempt on him. What here is true, and what is made up? Let's figure it out.
Swollen and visibly aged. That's how Putin appeared at the May 9th parade, sparking a new wave of discussions about his health and growing paranoia inside the Kremlin.
Well, that's just nonsense. Utter rubbish.
Journalists from the Daily Mail paid attention to the Russian dictator's appearance. The publication writes about his swollen cheeks and noticeably aged face. And in an appearance that is becoming increasingly difficult to hide, even behind the official Kremlin imagery.
Frightening and paranoid, Vladimir Putin is now confronting a growing wave of intense scrutiny and questions about his increasingly evident and deteriorating state of physical health. This comes after he was recently seen with a puffy, swollen, and quite noticeably aged appearance.
Well, it's not just about his appearance. On social media and among political commentators, the dictator's behavior has also drawn attention. In the footage, it was noticeable how he nervously fidgeted with his fingers, periodically clenched his hand under his jacket sleeve, and appeared extremely tense. The Daily Mail provides commentary regarding the bunker dweller's appearance.
A frail man stands, bent under the weight of a burden he can no longer lift.
No enthusiasm, no celebration.
Either Putin himself is afraid, or he is being intimidated and his fear is being stoked, which leads to paranoia.
He looks lonely and isolated inside his security bubble. Such discussions about the Kremlin leader's health have arisen more than once before. At the end of last year, after Putin met with the head of the Russian movement, Healthy Fatherland, journalists discussed his hands, noting withered skin and signs that many described as age-related changes. At that time, there were also suggestions of possible chronic pain. And this is far from an isolated case. During one of his video addresses, which lasted almost 8 minutes, Putin did not move his hands or fingers even once.
This could be the result of editing, where motionless hands were added to the body. Or the reason could lie in the dictator's illness or a desire to hide his nervousness. But
now the situation looks much more telling, because not only is Putin himself changing, but the entire atmosphere around him is changing as well. History knows many examples when dictators aged rapidly before the fall of their regime or their own death. And the reason for this, according to the monitoring group Crimean Wind, is chronic stress, isolation, and the constant fear of losing control over the system. And the current parade on Red Square is proof of that. The victory mania really looked pathetic. There was an unusual lack of displays of power. The show itself lasted only about 45 minutes, and the center of Moscow was effectively covered by a security dome and electronic warfare measures.
President Vladimir Putin, you did a very good job. Instead of a nationwide celebration, we got a personal special operation. A single deeply frightened aging dictator. To this
added Putin's wild fear. It's not just about Ukrainian strikes, but also the growing likelihood of a coup or assassination attempt from his own elites.
Putin has played himself into a corner.
Putin is, of course, a paranoid, but his fears are justified. He knows from Russian history that there is one thing that leads to major changes and sometimes even to revolutions: a bad war.
And the culmination of what's happening is his rapidly falling approval rating. According to VT Sayom, the approval rating of the Russian dictator has dropped to 70% and trust to 75%. At the same time, the share of those who disapprove of the president's work and do not trust him is growing. More than 18% and more than 20% respectively. These are the highest figures since the start of the full-scale invasion.
Well, this is already the end.
That is precisely why security measures around Putin are being tightened. Travel routes are being restricted, control is being strengthened, and his closest circle is being put into a state of virtual isolation. And the more actively the Kremlin tries to demonstrate control, the more obvious the opposite becomes. The system is becoming increasingly vulnerable, which means the great collapse of the greats is not far off.
For now, the Russian dictator still has enough strength to shamelessly threaten with a nuclear warhead. Here's something new again. The Oreshnik complex can be equipped with a nuclear charge. The new Sarmat missile has passed a successful test. It is capable of carrying a nuclear warhead. They plan to put this missile on combat duty by the end of the year. Russia continues to work on improving the Kinjal missile. Strange that even here, he didn't drag in a nuclear warhead this time. From Putin's scare tactics to real Russian terror. The main intelligence directorate reports that Russia has launched a prolonged combined attack on critical infrastructure in Ukraine. The first wave consists of numerous attack drones to overload the air defense system and strike civilian targets. Next, the occupiers plan to use a significant number of cruise missiles, both air and sea-launched, as well as ballistic missiles. The targets are critical infrastructure and vital facilities in major cities, defense industry enterprises, and government buildings. The war in Ukraine will end soon. It will end. This opinion was voiced by US President Donald Trump. Speaking with journalists, he added that there are no agreements with Putin that would provide for transferring control of the Donetsk and Luhansk regions to Russia. Meanwhile, Trump has begun his visit to China. He has come to the PRC for the first time since 2017. Note that Elon Musk is part of the American delegation. We are following the developments. The EU is strengthening Ukraine's negotiating position. In Brussels, a new blow is being prepared against Russia's shadow fleet to force Putin to agree to a peace deal as early as this summer. All the details are coming up next.
A new blow to Russia's shadow fleet. Brussels is preparing another round of sanctions against the Russian Federation. The main target will be the tankers of the Shadow Fleet, which help Russia export oil bypassing restrictions and provide one of its main sources of revenue. This is reported by Politico.
Tightening control over the fleet will help cut off one of the Kremlin's most important sources of income, and to increase pressure on Vladimir Putin in order to force him to abandon his maximalist demands. In any peace agreement on Ukraine, EU representatives stated,
According to Politico, the 21st package of EU sanctions could be adopted as early as the end of June or the beginning of July.
A blow to Russia's Shadow Fleet is probably what both Ukraine and the world are waiting for most right now. Because it is precisely thanks to the Shadow Fleet that Russia can continue to receive windfall profits from oil and invest them in the war. No windfall profits, no money, no war. It's a fairly straightforward logic, which unfortunately hasn't worked fully so far because the Europeans have constantly been looking for ways to both protect themselves from any price fluctuations on the market and, at the same time, somehow put pressure on Russia. That's why all of this has been ineffective.
It is expected that the new package of sanctions will also target Russian banks, financial institutions, and military-industrial companies, as well as firms selling stolen goods. Ukrainian grain.
That's why consistent steps are needed that would allow for real influence on Russia. To severely restrict the ability to transport Russian oil and to block European Union ports for Russia's Shadow Fleet. And even up to intercepting these tankers, as some European countries have recently tried to do. That is, if, for example, the Baltic and Mediterranean seas are truly blocked for Russian oil, then that's it. Putin will have no other options left but to enter negotiations and end the war.
Brussels believes that the Russian economy is experiencing its most difficult period since the start of the war. That is why now is the right moment to increase pressure on Moscow.
Russia is suffering from a static inflationary shock. That is exactly why in our meetings with the G7 and in bilateral meetings with representatives of the US, we emphasize that now is not the time to ease pressure on Russia. EU Economic Advisor, Valdis Dombrovskis.
As Politica writes, Ukraine, which US President Donald Trump accused of lacking leverage in negotiations with Russia, now wields far more influence than it did even a year ago. The EU loan of 90 billion euros, Ukraine's advances on the battlefield, its ability to produce its own long-range weapons, and the psychological impact of disrupting Moscow's celebrations, the Victory Day parade on May 9th. All of this contributes to a positive dynamic.
The 90 billion euros and the sanctions are working. They provide momentum and put Ukraine in a much more advantageous position. It is important to maintain this momentum. A high-ranking officer of the National Security Service of one of the NATO countries.
Ukraine's allies claim that a summer sanctions strike could play into Kiev's hands, since the new Prime Minister of Hungary, Peter Magyar, is now in power. It may be achieved. A lasting ceasefire in Iran and the US midterm elections in November could once again focus Americans' attention on the peace process.
And Europeans should not be afraid to demonstrate strength on these issues. Seizure of tankers, blockades, fines, and other similar sanctions are what can really affect Russia. Without this, it will be impossible to force Putin into real substantive negotiations.
Iran has put forward 5 mandatory conditions to the US for returning to the negotiating table. These include ending American and Israeli strikes on the territory of Iran and Lebanon, lifting sanctions, unfreezing the assets of the Islamic Republic, compensation for losses, and recognition of Iran's sovereignty over the Strait of Hormuz. Something tells me that Washington will reject these demands, which means the war will continue. Finally, a word about sports achievements. 13-year-old Ukrainian pole vaulter Omolyan Herasimchuk has set a new world record in his age category. At a competition in Bulgaria, he cleared 4 meters 40 centimeters. In the video you're seeing now, his jump is 4 meters 22 centimeters. That was in January of this year. We are proud. That's all for today. Thank you for watching. Strength to Ukraine's defenders, both men and women. Glory to Ukraine. Subscribe to the channel, like, comment, and share this video. See you next time.